Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is now 3 p.m. on Tuesday, September 24th. I'd like to call the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order. Hi, Miss Only.
Hello.
Could you take the first, please?
Yes, ma'am. Livingston, Mackey, Newton.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Like to say that Mr. Livingston did contact me to let me know that he would not be in attendance for the meeting today. Next is the approval of minutes from July 16th, 2024.
Move to approve.
Second? Discussion?
Was delightful reading.
Madam Clerk?
Mackey,
Yes,
Newton.
Yes.
Motion passes.
thank you. And also, I would like to recognize and thank Councilwoman Teratio for joining our committee meeting today.
For having me.
Next item is the adoption of our agenda. Any additions or changes?
No requested changes.
Move to approve.
Second? Any discussion?
Mackey,
Yes.
Newton. Motion passes.
So our one item on their agenda today is 4A, the public-private partnership update. Just a brief refresher. It's been, I guess, a little over a month now, where at our last committee meeting, we decided to reach out and organize a focus group to give us feedback for the establishment of our P3, the public-private partnership. This focus group was made up of suggested representatives from council members as well as from staff and from our economic development department, looking at some industry leaders. And we've come up with a very diverse group of individuals and have been able to host meetings with them. And so today we have Mr. Jones back with us to walk through his very efficient roadmap that he has developed for the P3 and give us an update on that feedback received from the focus group. And so I'm going to say, Mr. Jones, this is an informal as we go. People are more than welcome to ask questions, and then we can discuss more at the end. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to other members of the committee. And I don't see anybody from the focus group here, but we're going to talk about them in just a minute. If we can go to the next slide, we'll just kind of take a look at our agenda for today. So I do want to review and refresh a little bit. It has been, I think, since July 2nd, since we were all together discussing the P3. So we'll go back through the overall timeline. And then as you indicated, Madam Chair, we wanted to really give the committee a report from the focus group to include the folks that served, the folks that attended, some of their discussion topics and then recommendations. And then, of course, we'll finish up with the roadmap. I've got Q&A here at the end, but I'm glad to take questions at any time, and would also invite those that participated in the focus groups, which obviously includes you, Madam Chair, Administrator Brown, County Attorney Wright, and my colleague Emily Luther. So we were all at the focus groups from all three of those meetings. So let's go to the next slide and just do a quick refresh on our timeline. So this is the very same timeline that Council took a look at its work session on July 2nd. This is the timeline that we're working under. This is sort of the larger timeline. The roadmap that we'll get to in a little while has a lot of additional steps that need to be taken. But right now we're working through the issues and the questions and the recommendations from the focus group to ultimately bring it back to County Council in November. And if County Council wishes to move forward, then to do what we call the soft launch of the P3 in December. work on an operational transition of the Economic Development Department to the P3 in the second half of the fiscal year or the first half of next year, with the P3 being fully operational at the beginning of fiscal year that starts July 1, 2025. So this, again, same timeline we've been working under. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the focus group. So this was a concept that had come before this committee and then ultimately went before County Council. And the idea was to formalize conversations with those in the community, the business community in particular, whose voices needed to be heard on the P3 to seek their input, to find out sort of their general reaction to the P3. And so the slide you have in front of you, this is sort of the concept slide. We called it the advisory group originally, but we've changed it to focus group because ultimately that's what it ended up being. The concept around the focus group was to have it be 5 to 7 members, again, provide citizens input, limited duration, meaning that the focus group is not intended to live on into perpetuity. We anticipate that we'll have a few more meetings, and you'll see those on the roadmap. It's advisory only, and so even when we couch, quote, recommendations from the focus group, it is just their opinions and their thoughts that have been shared and solicited. And finally, that it would be a group that chair and staff convene, which is exactly what has happened. I'd also note that Mr. Livingston, I think, was present at most of the focus group meetings. Let's take a look at the folks, the members of the focus group. So really, really pleased with just the group. If we go to the next slide. We had everyone from higher education to banking to real estate to women-owned businesses. It really was a nice group. So let me start with Dr. Tracy Dunn, who's the dean of the business school at Benedict College. She was a late addition as we were looking for a higher ed representative. It ended up being a remarkably a good addition for the focus group. Had a lot of good input, gave us some even additional input offline. Michael Edens with First Reliance Bank sort of gave us that viewpoint. Damon Jeter, to whom he's certainly known to all of you as a former council member and now private citizen and business person, also had lots of good input. Lucinda Lewis Ellis gave us this kind of a small business viewpoint on the focus group. Heather Mitchell is president of the Boudreaux Group, which is an architectural firm here in town. Maceo Nance is a long time veteran of the South Carolina Department of Commerce. Maceo, I thought, had this tremendous just insight into lots of things, and honestly talked to us a lot about what makes P3s effective and the mistakes that P3s make. And you'll hear a little bit about that in just a minute. But Maceo is a 40-plus year veteran of the Department of Commerce who told us at our last focus group meeting that he was going to retire in December. So we're lucky to have gotten him before he did. Ted Pitts is former president of the state chamber and now is the head of Wilson Kibler Real Estate in Columbia, another great participant with just good insight. Rick Shippey was our existing industry representative from Mark Anthony Brewing. Rick was with us. Rick, I thought, had some really good insights into workforce development, which you'll see is something that we're going to talk about extensively. And then Kim Smith is a local healthcare entrepreneur who was able to join us. And again, I think just give us a different perspective in making sure that the P3 has got its eye on the ball, not just on traditional brick and mortar sort of manufacturing, but is thinking about knowledge-based jobs as well. So again, just could not be more pleased with the group. And I want to give the council just the affirmation that these folks were engaged. We did not have to beg them to come to meetings. They've provided us input in between meetings. And so these were just really great focus group participants. So let's take a look at the next slide, which is just a quick summary of the meetings. I wanted to give you a sense of sort of what went on at the meetings. And we'll look in just a minute at all the things that were discussed. But we've had 3 meetings, and normally we did that over lunch because these are busy people. And so August 6th, August 23rd, and September 10th. In most cases, of course, Chair Mackey, Mr. Livingston, the county attorney, the county administrator are all present. And almost every instance, these are busy people, but we were there for 2 hours, I think, each time, really just running through issues, letting them talk. You know, we had a couple of issues we wanted them to discuss. Again, excellent attendance and engagement and just really thoughtful discussion. So let's go to the next slide, which really, I think, highlights the 6 or so things that were before the focus group at various meetings. And they didn't discuss these at every meeting, but they took these topics up in the course of those 3 meetings. And we'll go through sort of the highlights under each of these topics, but let's go through the topics first. First one was, how do we define success of the P3? And of course, that's a question that I know has also been proffered by the County Council, and I thought they gave us some good input. Second question is yet another item that we have discussed among this body and the full council, which is the board composition. Third, funding and organization, in other words, the function of the organization. Fourth, priorities. Y'all may recall that we've discussed at length the menu, if you will, of the P3. Fifth, mistakes to avoid, and there was just some real gold in that discussion. And finally, the name and the brand, all of which were also helpful. I stand before you, however, without a name to the P3. Just don't want you to get too excited. There is no name yet, but we've got some parameters to work with. So let's go to the next slide. Let's first talk about defining success. The good thing about having a bunch of business people in the room, and even having folks from higher ed in the room who are busy, is the last thing they want is yet another organization with a slick logo, but not much of a plan of work. And so they highlighted 3 or 4 things that we distilled. One was the organization will be successful if it's relevant, and you all can appreciate that as much as anything. That relevance means that you're adding value, and they talked to us about some ways to add value. That the organization should be respected among economic development organizations, both in the state and in the Midlands. It needs to address the priorities that it established, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. And finally, it'll be successful if it has county-wide impact, which I appreciated, because that is a message that we've heard loud and clear from the County Council, that the P3 is intended to be uniquely Richland, something that impacts all of the citizens, and the focus group saw it the same way. Go to the next slide. Board composition. I wouldn't say there's much change here. We talked at length about the importance of the county as the main funder of the P3, having the majority power to appoint having the power to appoint the majority of the members of the board, and there was really no disagreement with that. So we've discussed that with you all before, where the county would have likely 2 members of county council, and then an additional 3 appointees from county council, so 5 of the 9 board members. There was a lot of conversation about the nature of the board members, ensuring that they're committed to the cause, ensuring that they're folks that have ties to the area. We even got to the point where we talked about a residency requirement, that folks should be living in Richland County. So again, they really were thoughtful about this. They suggested that we include within the bylaws of the P3 the qualifications for good board members and the expectations for good board members. And I think all of them wanted to make sure that the folks that served on this board took it seriously. So that was, I think, helpful. The other thing that was really interesting was the concept of at least starting the board with co-chairs. And so, if I'm not mistaken, Madam Chair, Damon Jeter suggested that for an organization like this one that is just getting started, at least in the first year or so, that it should be co-chaired equally by a private sector person and a public sector person, particularly as it's getting off the ground. And so that was something that the rest of the focus group, I think, found some value in. And at least for now, that's a concept that we will at least allow in the bylaws. It's up to the council ultimately if that's what they'd like it to do, but we will provide for a co-chair at least in the first year of the P3. Let's go to the next slide on the funding and organization. We talked a fair amount about the idea behind where the funds would come from. I don't think any of these folks were enamored of having an organization whose real job was to raise money versus do the work. And so we talked extensively about the county being the main contributor, which is consistent with other P3s that we've seen around the state. I think there was acceptance, however, of the need for private sector support of the P3, both in time and in monetary contribution, and certainly an acknowledgement that the P3 needs to be well funded so it can be nimble. And the concept of the P3 being nimble is something that Attorney Wright and I have talked about here before you all, ensuring that it is able to move quickly when it's time to move quickly, and support the efforts, the economic development efforts here in the county. We talked a lot too about exactly how the P3 would function. And there was a pretty strong sentiment among the focus group. Again, it's a recommendation, it's by no means a requirement, that the employees and executive director should work for the P3. Those are the details we still have not worked out, and we talked a lot about what that could look like and to what extent there should be accountability from the P3 board and those that are working with the P3 to the county council, but I thought you might find that interesting. I think there's work to be done on that topic. And candidly, I think that's something we'll end up bringing back some ideas to the council about. The next thing I just want to share with you is we talked a lot about how important it is that the county council remain involved with economic development. And to a man and a woman, I don't think there was any disagreement in the room that county council needed to have a prominent role in economic development. They talked a lot about the need for there to be accountability between the P3 board and the council. And one of the primary things they discussed was that the P3 board and the executive director needed to lay out a program of work that was to be funded by the dollars that were coming from the county. And they needed to be held accountable to ensure that the items that were in that work plan were taken care of. And so I thought you all appreciate that the private sector voices, I think, are consistent with the county council on that front, that if the county council chooses to move in this direction, the P3 has to be accountable to county council. Let's go to the next slide. Priorities. Oh man, we had a really good conversation about priorities. So we shared with them the same list of menu items that you all have seen. And as you'll see when we get down into the mistakes to avoid, and Maceo Nance was pretty outspoken on this. He said, you can't be everything to everybody. He said, you've got to figure out why you exist and what your purpose is, and you've got to have a couple of priorities you really focus on. And so I think we spent our last meeting really talking about that. One topic that came up in every meeting, all three, was workforce development. You heard it from everybody in the room, how critical it was. You heard it from Dr. Dunn from Benedict and sort of what they're trying to do. You heard it from Rick Shippey, who is trying to hire people, and you heard it from everybody else in the room. Clearly, workforce development is a place that the P3 can add value. The other area, which again, unprompted, but I think extremely consistent with what the county council has said, is community engagement. And specifically what they meant by that is ensuring that bridges are being built between what's happening at the county council level and what's happening in the private sector, so there's an appreciation for the goals and direction, and that there's open communication about those things, and that the P3 be focused on ensuring that those bridges are built and maintained. And finally, we asked the question, we said, what would make this P3 and what it does for you more valuable or most valuable versus other organizations you're affiliated with? And several of them highlighted the ability to develop quality relationships with other business and government leaders in the Midlands. In other words, to have thoughtful opportunities to meet other business leaders, to solve problems collectively, to have somebody you can call when you encounter something. So that's why fostering relationships is listed here as a priority of the P3. Now, what does that look like? And we talked at length, even before we got to the focus groups, about the P3 sponsoring events, the P3 bringing in the legislative delegation, the P3 bringing people together. Council has discussed that. What we're hearing from the focus group is that's a need, and that's something that the P3 could help bridge. All right, let's go to the next slide. Mistakes to avoid. They were critically clear on the point that the P3 needs to know what its job is. The P3 needs to pursue what it is to pursue, and is not to then experience the classic mission creep. So tend to your knitting, focus on workforce development, focus on community engagement, focus on fostering relationships. Avoid being duplicative of other economic development organizations in the Midlands. We've talked about that too, to make sure that our P3 builds bridges with those organizations, but doesn't seek to duplicate that which others are already engaged in. And then clarity of the vision. So when the P3 is rolled out, it's got to be clear to everyone here, everyone that's voting, and everyone on the other side who is receiving news of the P3, what the purpose of the P3 is. And finally, name and brand. We talked about the name and the brand at every meeting. We asked the question as many ways we could ask it. We asked if anybody had a thunderbolt, idea for a name, and the answer was no. But they did give us some parameters to think about. First, they were unequivocal in their recommendation that the name of the P3 include a geographic marker. So what I mean by that is, not a name that is, you have to explain to somebody. That when you hear the name, you recognize that the P3 is representing a certain geography. And in the words of Maceo Nance, if you got to explain it, it ain't the right name. That's what he said. He said, you shouldn't have to explain it. I said, okay, I understand. And so the other recommendation was to seek assistance. And so right now, it's our understanding that the Economic Development Office is already in the process of working on an RFP to help develop or redevelop its website. And so our understanding is a part of what's gone out for bid does include some help with at least a P3 brand and name. We do not believe the P3 brand and name, much to our chagrin, sorry, Madam Chair, that it will be ready by December of this year. And so what we have talked about is a soft launch of the P3. What we have also talked about with the Economic Development Office is if this moves forward, then the traditional economic development sort of community business engagement breakfast that happens in January, I believe, might be pushed back a little bit to allow the work of developing the P3 brand and name to conclude, to possibly announce it in February or March of next year. Again, that's looking way ahead, but just wanted to give you all a sense that that is sort of the one thing we could not get Russell to the ground. We couldn't get him down, Mr. Pugh. It's still up, still running, the name and the brand. All right. Finally, the roadmap, and this is our last slide for today, and glad to take input. We just wanted to show you, this is the very same roadmap that we shared with the County Council on July 2nd. And so as we typically do, all the boxes that are in gray are things that have been completed. The remaining boxes, if it's orange, that is a meeting of this committee. If it's green, it's a contemplated meeting of the County Council. And finally, if it's blue, it's a final P3 focus group meeting. We've got the December launch on there, and then we've got the transition of operations. Obviously, sometimes these dates change. There might be more to do pending the kind of reaction of this committee and pending, once the committee makes a report to County Council, any further input. And that brings us to the end of our presentation, Madam Chair. Certainly glad to answer any questions. And want to invite others who have been present, in particular, County Attorney Wright, Mr. Brown, to just jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate it. Thank you for kind of putting all that together, because it was a lot of meetings and a lot of information, but thank you for putting it together in a concise manner. Want to welcome Councilwoman Barron and Vice Chair Pugh to the meeting. Thank you for joining us. And so I'd like to open it up. Attorney Wright or Administrator Brown, did you have anything you want to say before I open it up to council members? Okay, that's fine. I just leaning for.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir, you recognize.
No, I just wanted to reiterate that I do think that it is a good idea to have a P3 if it's done the right way, because there are benefits to it. And I think that in the past, we've obviously been blessed that things kind of worked out well without having one, but I think that we need to plan for the future, and it does have its benefits, but it needs to be set up correctly.
Thank you, sir. All right, I'm gonna open up to council members. If anybody has any thoughts, questions, comments?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Pugh, let me get to Ms. Newton first, though. Is that okay? Because she's on the committee. No, you fine. No, you fine. Ms. Newton, you recognize, but you next.
I would be delighted to hear from Derek Pugh from District 2. I just want the record to show that. So thank you, Ray, for this recap. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the opportunity to hear about the steps that we're taking. And I guess to Mr. Wright's point, we of course would want to make sure that anything that we do, we're doing the right way. And I think that the county has been very methodical in this process. I'm still not on board with the idea, but I think we've been methodical in terms of the way that we've gone about it. But I did have a few questions for you. First, as we look at the focus group that we pulled together, I'm just curious to know how the group was positioned with the attendees. Was the question, the county's about to do a P3, how should we do it? Was it the county is considering a P3, do you think we should do it or not? And if so, how should we do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll start. Actually, it was quite factual. It was the county's considering a P3, and we'd like your input on it. And I guess it goes without saying, but I probably should have included it in the summary. we didn't face any opposition at all to the idea of a P3. So the focus group was unanimous sort of in its support of a P3 taking on some of the things that have been discussed today.
Thank you. And then I'm just curious, and if this question is too in the weeds for now, that's fine. One of the points that you had on your slides, which I think came from the focus group, was talking about having the board be accountable to council. And I'm curious to know whether structurally or spiritually, was the primary method of accountability that you discussed the two members of council, again, understanding these proposals, the two members of council who are serving there. There are also appointees. I mean, I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about that. And the reason that I ask, because I know that there would be two members of council and we would appoint 3 people. But sometimes with the way that you have board terms, et cetera, accountability can take years in coming potentially. So anything you could say about that accountability?
Well, I'll start. I will say that focus group as a whole, they definitely were understanding that they were accountable to county council because county council was funding it, and they would be really looking to county council to kind of lead and guide of what their expectations were, and they understood that if they didn't kind of stay on track with those key initiatives, that they would know that, okay, come the next year, they might not have the funding. And the board was really sure and really understood that, no, we're only doing this really to help grow the county.
That's a good question. So you're saying the board, do you mean the focus group?
Sorry, yes, the focus
Okay.
group, yes. That they were really understanding the importance of county council being involved. But please add more, Ray, if there's more that I left out.
No, I interpreted it the same way, but I guess also it was missional, Ms. Newton. In other words, that the P3 itself, its mission needed to be tied to what the county was trying to accomplish, and they needed to be on the same page in terms of mission. And so I viewed that as well as part of the accountability.
Thank you. And I have one other question, but I'm happy to let other colleagues ask theirs.
Okay, Mr. Pugh, you wanna go, and then we'll come back to Ms. Newton.
Ms. Newton, that's exactly what I wanted about our participation on it.
So my last question for right now is, workforce is just huge. I mean, it's hugely, hugely important. And I guess I'm just curious, so one of the things that they talked about was the importance of workforce. One of the other things that you mentioned was a desire to not be duplicative. And I could rattle off 15 organizations that are working on workforce, some of whom, like, that's all they do. That is their whole entire job, is workforce. And so I guess I'm just curious if, and you talked about a lot of things, if there were any particular insights on how they saw the county maybe being able to play a different, unique, or more helpful role compared to those other 15 people, organizations, or however many there are who wake up all day, every day and just do workforce.
I think that's fair. Workforce development is a big umbrella. There's a lot that happens under workforce development. But I'll give you at least probably the primary example, at least the most recent one that was discussed at the focus group. And so you have Dr. Tracy Dunn, who's the dean at Benedict, and she's listening to all the needs, things that are happening. And she's listening to Rick Shippey, who's talking about needs he has at Mark Anthony Brewing. And she's saying, I think if we were all talking, I think we could do more at Benedict to give you more of what you need as a local industry. And so I think we're really talking about building a communication bridge direct from industry to the higher education institutions in Columbia, of which I think we rattled off 5 between the universities and tech schools. And so that was an example where you had a dean of a business school who's turning out graduates, and notwithstanding all the good efforts of the other workforce development related organizations, none of whom am I criticizing, she still felt like there was a gap.
Okay, and I know I sound down on things. I'm really pro workforce, but I guess I wonder, as a person who, worked with Midlands Technical College for years, where they do have, as just one example, they do have that direct, honest to goodness, college to business pipeline where people are, working with some of the same equipment, where they are shaping the curricula. So again, it's just something that I'm curious about. Again, not down on workforce. I think it's hugely important. Whether they're 15 or 25 organizations, I don't think anybody has totally cracked it. Just trying to understand what is the special sauce that we would bring that isn't already being brought in those areas.
One of the, I think, takeaways that I received listening to them talk was that I think you're right, Midlands Tech does have it. Yes, but Benedict didn't have it. They weren't at the table. And I think that group was helping us to identify where some holes are in Richland County of where it's not happening or how it could be happening better.
Thank you. And I guess the only other thing that I would add then to that conversation, which would also hopefully be, of course, a part of the board, is that if this was something that we adopted as our umbrella, to that spirit of non-duplicativeness, that we find ways to where we don't have to be the group that's carrying the flag on every fight. Maybe it's just, okay, well, we connected you with you, and it's clear. I don't know why I can't think of those people's names right now. I feel so bad. Some of those
Like Ready as C.
for example, yeah, that was the one I really couldn't remember just
Okay,
at that moment. I would hope that we would, I don't know if humble is enough, but be efficient enough to be like, you know what, if this is a need, maybe we just need to send somebody over there, and then we can focus on some other things, because there is a lot of good work in the area, even though it hasn't solved the problem.
There was even talk about, having the county be more proactive in communication with some of our educational institutions of where we are going next in economic development. What is the industry seeing, or what are we recruiting, or what is coming next, so that they can then kind of ahead of time start preparing for that better. There appeared to be conversation that a lot of that conversation wasn't happening as well, and they felt like they would find out about. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, well, I'm not hearing anything, and I don't think we have anybody online. Is that correct, Ms. Only? Okay. Wanting to go back to the roadmap, which is the last page. Mr. Jones walked through this with our kind of upcoming meetings. And so we have one final focus group where we really wanted to share any feedback, thoughts from the committee and council with this group, and then also kind of wrap up the feedback session. And then Mr. Jones and his team looks forward to preparing an actual document that would help guide us forward to approving a resolution in November. So if there are any other thoughts or concerns you have, please let us know so we can continue to stay on the schedule that is before us. Mr. Jones, any final words?
No, Madam Chair, that's it for today.
Can I just?
Yes, ma'am.
I just
Please,
feel
we
like
have plenty of time.
I would be remiss, Mr. Jones, if I didn't, praise your boxy timeline that you have, you've gotten us so accustomed to. So I really appreciate it, sir. That was real love.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, and your entire team.
Yes, ma'am.
They have done a great job of really leading and facilitating this focus group. And I think overall it's been great to work with such a diverse group of business leaders, and they really are fully invested and provided their feedback open and honest. So I'm happy for it, and that you all and your team, Mr. Jones, could create an environment where they felt safe and comfortable to do that. So thank you.
Well, my colleague Beth Webb has joined us too, and so she's certainly a big part of that. So thanks to Beth, but thanks to Parker Poe Consulting as well.
Thank you. You recognize Vice Chair Pugh.
Mr. Jones, I just wanted to say, I can't believe nobody didn't take my name real serious about it for the P3.
I'm gonna respond. Ms. Barron, did you have anything? You sure? We'll talk about offline. Okay. Ms. Teratio, are you good? You good? Okay, S Committee. We're at item number 5.
Move to adjourn.
Second, Madam Clerk?
Mackey,
Yes,
Newton.
Yes.
meeting adjourned. Thank you.